Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, and children of all ages. Today we're going to talk about a story out of Phoenix, Arizona that is getting a lot of attention in the conservative media, and it is because it is another case, or at least on its surface, it appears to be another case, where the criminal's needs and the criminal's desires are put above the law-abiding citizen. If you guys are unfamiliar with this story, essentially in Phoenix, in this Family Dollar, a serial shoplifter enters the store at about 8 p.m. He starts stealing stuff. The store employee who recognizes this individual goes and confronts him. This person punches him in the face, and according to a lot of people in conservative media, the store owner or the store worker then pulls out a firearm and fires upon this customer in self-defense. However, unfortunately, even though on this channel we try our very best not to sympathize, empathize, or pretend criminals are the victims, this way of covering the story is just factually wrong, and that's what we're going to get into today. But before we get into that, I just want to remind you guys that on April 15th, I will be in Austin, Texas at the Minds Fest event. There's going to be a bunch of speakers. I'm not included in one of them, but if you come out, come get your tickets and all that. You see me, you could say hi and all that. So link in the description if you want to get those tickets. Now look, in order to understand the case that we're talking about, we have to understand some basic principles of self-defense and some basic principles of being a shopkeep or shop owner and all that, because this actually falls pretty much in line with what we've established as a long-standing precedent in the United States of America. And that long-standing precedent has essentially been described as a man's life is more than a candy bar, meaning that a shopkeep, even though they are privileged in a lot of circumstances to detain shoplifters, can't simply just fire upon somebody for stealing without any actual additional provocation or lethal threat or whatever. This is not to be confused with situations that we've talked about in the past, like the Jose Alba situation, where he's being attacked by a man that is much larger than him, that is currently grabbing onto him at the time that Alba grabbed a weapon to defend himself. This is straight up about whether or not you can use deadly force when you're confronted with physical force, and obviously that is not the case. Now, normally when I go into these cases and I hear about a serial shoplifter, I tend to look at who the district attorney is in that area, and since this is Phoenix, we end up with the Maricopa County district attorney, and the Maricopa County district attorney is not a Soros, the left-wing prosecutor, or anything of the like. It's actually a veteran prosecutor that you guys might remember, because she was the prosecutor that was chosen by the Republicans during the Kavanaugh hearing in order to interrogate Christine Blasey Ford. If you remember, she had this little baby desk in front of the senators, and she was asking questions on behalf of the senators. So you have, in this case, not a left-wing, not prosecute anybody kind of prosecutor. You have Rachel Mitchell, which means that if they report the shoplifter, then the shoplifter will be charged throughout the normal process that we would expect from a district attorney's office. Now, it turns out that shoplifting oftentimes is a misdemeanor, so even if you get a little bit of jail time, even if you get a fine, even if you're facing any of these things, you're not going to get that lengthy of a sentence. But to be clear, this is not a circumstance where the district attorney's office, because they're a left-wing progressive, was not charging shoplifters as a matter of policy, and thus that led to a spike in shoplifting, and thus that led to frustration by the people who work at these stores, and thus that could be considered as a contributing factor, at least for us in the audience, even though this is not a legally valid defense, for the frustration being felt by the store employee. As the store employee, Kevin Madrid, actually says himself, he was frustrated, he was angry, he got hit in the face, and out of anger, he fired upon the shoplifter. Now, initially I thought, you know what, this could be an example of like an imperfect self-defense, which would be more akin to a manslaughter rather than a premeditated murder, but after looking at the reports, it appears that this person was wounded 10 times, and then he ultimately ended up dying, and there were 15 shots fired. Now, I've seen a lot of people saying, listen, a mag dump is perfectly normal, that's what you're supposed to do, but in reality, the circumstances of this mag dump definitely lend themselves to the murder charge, because as another store employee said, he continued to fire even when this person was on the ground repeatedly until the gun was empty. The fact of the matter is, even though I don't have sympathy for criminals, even though I absolutely detest shoplifters and this narrative that shoplifters are in fact victims, this is a pretty much open and shut case of whether or not you should charge somebody, because this goes far beyond the pale of normal self-defense. Now, I know some people will say, hey, listen, a punch in the face could kill you, and sure, that's definitely true, but in reality, a punch in the face is not a deadly threat in terms of the law. It's a regular assault, a simple assault, or battery, depending on the state that you're in. In fact, I'm in one of the few states where assault means physical contact, but maybe Phoenix is the state where that would be classified as battery, which is what most states in the union actually have. So what you have here is somebody committing a misdemeanor shoplifting, being confronted by a manager at a Family Dollar, assaulting that manager or battering that manager, but it's a simple battery, and then the response to that being deadly force. And it's not even a deadly force like bang, bang, you got hit in the face, then you drew your gun and you fired. It's a response as in, you got hit in the face, you drew your gun, you fired, the guy hits the ground, and you continue to fire into him. Now, while I don't think that Kevin Salas-Madrid is this evil bad person or anything like that, the facts of the case are what they are, and the charges are warranted. And believe me, I would love for this to be a self-defense scenario. I would love for this to be a case where we could all rally around his defense and all of that, because he's actually been quite open about the fact that he feels like he made an absolutely horrible mistake. He let his anger get the best of him, and he acted irrationally in that moment, and even he himself does not believe that this was proportional force that was utilized. If you look at the affidavits, the court documents, as reported by Fox News, he's saying that he completely lost control in that situation, and he definitely should not have fired those shots. He was angry in the moment, which is as described by his fellow store employee. And again, on this channel, we defend the right to self-defense over and over and over again repeatedly. It's a proven track record, but the thing that I don't do, that other people in my side of the political spectrum sometimes fall into, is just tell you guys what you want to hear time and time again, because I know I have an audience that is very anti-criminal, very pro-self-defense, very pro-Second Amendment. So while it might be easy to try to twist and turn the facts, exaggerate the level of force that was delivered with this punch, I've seen a lot of people talk about how the glasses were knocked off by the initial punch. In reality, this is just not what equates to a deadly threat. Remember, it's not whether or not it's possible in some way for him to get punched in the face, then fall down and crack his skull, and then ultimately end up dying that makes it a deadly threat. It's about whether or not a reasonable person in those same circumstances would perceive a deadly threat. And again, the hypothetical of you could get knocked out is offset by the reality of he did not get knocked out. So you might be able to draw the gun. You might be able to try to detain this person. Even if you want to argue that some of the earlier shots were warranted, there's no excuse for the mag dump into the guy's body while he's on the ground completely disabled. Even if you speculate that maybe possibly theoretically he could have had a gun, it would seem like the suspect that attacked you with physical force would have attacked you with the deadly force of that gun that you think might exist if he were actually presenting a deadly threat. Again, all of these scenarios do not aid the store person in his defense. In reality, when you look at the facts of the case, the charges are warranted, and I think it's very important for us to understand where the limits of self-defense actually are. It's also important for us to delineate these circumstances versus similar circumstances that we talked about in the past. One of my major issues with the Alba case in comparison to this was that Jose Alba was trapped. He had no real way to flee. The guy was grabbing onto him. He was assaulting him. There was another person ready to assault to him. So that 2-to-1 threat ended up escalating the situation to the point where you could argue it was a deadly force scenario. However, there is no indication that these are the facts of this case. In fact, we have just the opposite indication. It appears that the store person ended up confronting him in the aisles of the store. He ends up getting punched in the face, takes a step back, draws his weapon, none of which he's being attacked during the process of, and then he opened fires on the person. So it would seem that we had somebody who intended to kind of punch and run. Now, of course, he could have done physical force, he could have done no force, he might have been able to just detain him with the firearm, the shopkeeper's privilege and all of that, but the thing that you cannot do is shoot somebody for stealing from you. You can't shoot somebody for throwing a punch at you, even if the punch hurts, because that punch on its own is not the deadly threat necessary, the prerequisite that you need to act in self-defense. And for those of you who are saying, well, what about manslaughter? What about manslaughter? The thing that you need to understand is that the difference between manslaughter and a murder is intent. So you end up in a scenario where, sure, you could argue aggravated manslaughter. He pulls out the gun really quickly, he ends up firing upon him really quickly, and then that could be a manslaughter situation. However, intent can be established, premeditation, which is what you need for a murder charge, in a split second. It's a conscious decision, and ending up firing all the shots in the magazine when this guy's on the ground is a conscious decision. When you take the punch, your glasses get knocked off, you pull out your firearm and you decide you're going to blow this guy away, that could be premeditation. So in reality, I'm hoping that this 24-year-old person, who's been pretty open and honest about the mistake that he made, would get a lighter sentence in comparison to somebody who has no remorse or any of those other situations that we talked about in the past. But we should expect some kind of conviction, whether that be through a plea agreement or something, because this just cannot stand. And I can't tell you potential would-be self-defenders out there that this is the way you should act in these circumstances, because this is clearly and obviously not a protected scenario. So while you might enjoy it and you might say, yeah, I get the criminal, no sympathy for him, you steal from me, you deserve to die, in reality, that is not a feeling that is actually going to translate into a legal defense in a court of law. So I'm not going to give you that kind of advice or validation when we're talking about a specific legal issue. I know a lot of people like to throw weird, unrelated legal terms in the comments of these videos, so I just want to go over them really quickly so you can understand. So a lot of people will say the Castle Doctrine, it's very prominent. What you have to understand about the Castle Doctrine is that it does not apply just to structures or anything like that, because essentially what the Castle Doctrine does is that it uses the trespass into your occupied dwelling, which is your home. A lot of times it's actually your car as well, can be covered by the Castle Doctrine, as the prerequisite for deadly force, because when somebody breaks in and violates the sanctity of your castle, it is not up to you to ascertain whether they mean to do you just physical harm, steal from you, or deadly harm. The presumption is on you that you're acting in the right within the confines of your castle, but that does not apply to the business, because there's no distinguishment between a shoplifter entering your store in the way that they're allowed, because that's not the crime at hand, and somebody who's not a shoplifter entering your store. So Castle Doctrine has no application here. As for stand your ground, or in reality no duty to flee, because oftentimes stand your ground is a specific piece of legislation that has nothing really to do with this. It kind of codifies in a different way the no duty to flee. This is not a situation where it's like, oh, well, he should have been able to flee or couldn't have fled or anything like that. This is a situation where the force presented against him does not meet the deadly threat. So what you end up having in these stand your ground kind of cases, or the no duty to flee scenarios, is that you still need that deadly force. It's just that the prosecution can't use your escapability against you at trial. So that also totally inapplicable to what we're talking about here. This is all about whether or not the requisite force was presented against the person who worked at the store. And in reality, as far back as you can go in terms of the English common law tradition, this was just not the case. You can't shoot somebody over a candy bar. Man's life is worth more than a candy bar. I want you to think about that anytime you think about these cases where shoplifters end up getting shot without presenting a more threatening kind of stance against the person at the store. So while I am very sympathetic to Kevin Salas-Madrid, I understand the frustration, I understand the anger, because I'm a person and that's something you can understand. His escalation, even by his own estimation, was well out of proportion, and thus I expect some form of conviction. But hey, those are just my thoughts. They happen to be 100% factual and logical and correct in every possible way, but if you disagree with me, let me know your wrong opinion down in the comments below. If you like this video, you can show them by leaving a like, you can subscribe for more content, you can follow me on all my social media, you can support me via the support links in the description of this video. This has been me talking about the Family Dollar so-called self-defense, in reality unjustified shooting. Till next time.